The silence hit Alistister Finch the moment he cut the engine of his car in front of his mother's charming, usually sound-filled cottage on Lilac Lane. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a suburban afternoon. It was a dead, oppressive stillness, a void where the familiar symphony of his mother Eleanor's life should have been. No gentle classical music drifting from the open windows, no murmur of the television, not even the cheerful clinking of her teacup as she enjoyed her afternoon brew on the sun-dappled porch. That porch, her favorite spot, was starkly empty. The vibrant hanging baskets of fuchsias and petunias seemed to droop in the unnatural hush. Alistister, a man whose professional life as chief of the city's audio forensics unit was dedicated to the nuanced world of sound, felt an immediate visceral unease. His ears, trained to detect the subtlest acoustic anomalies, registered this profound absence of sound as a blaring alarm. He walked quickly up the flagstone path, bordered by his mother's impeccably tended roses, their scent usually a welcoming balm, now failing to dispel the cold knot forming in his stomach. The front door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open, slowly calling out, "Mother, are you here?" Only the heavy silence answered, swallowing his voice. He moved through the small, tidy hallway into the living room, and there she was, Eleanor Finch, a woman whose 72 years had been largely defined by her love of music, and the gentle cadence of conversation was slumped in her wingback chair, not reading, not knitting, just staring. Her face, usually alight with a quiet intelligence and warmth, was chalky white, her eyes wide, with a vacant horror that chilled Alistister to the core. On the antique mahogany coffee table before her, like the desecrated relics of a plundered tomb, lay the glittering, crushed remnants of her advanced hearing aids. They weren't merely broken. They looked as if they had been subjected to a frenzied, brutal attack. Beside the scattered plastic and twisted wires lay a heavy claw-headed hammer, its polished steel face incongruous against the delicate lace doily beneath it. Mother Alistister rushed to her side, kneeling, his hand instinctively reaching for hers. It was ice cold. She flinched, her gaze slowly, agonizingly shifting to meet his. He saw the raw desolation there, the profound shock of a world suddenly violently muted. "Alistister." She breathed, her voice a faint hoarse whisper he had to strain to catch, even in the tomb-like silence. She took them, right out of my ears. And then, the hammer. Tears welled, tracing slow paths down her deeply lined cheeks. Said they were noises, hurting her. Before Alistister could process the full horror, before he could ask the inevitable, a voice sharp as shattered glass and dripping with self-righteous indignation, pierced the stillness from the hallway. "Well, it's hardly a tragedy, is it? More of a public service, I'd say. Those dreadful contraptions were an absolute menace, Dr. Finch. The ultrasonic frequencies they emitted were simply agonizing. Your mother was repeatedly warned." Alistister rose, turning to face the intruder. Mrs. Millisent Adler, president of the Oak Haven Hills Homeowners Association, stood framed in the living room doorway, her arms clasped tightly across her chest, her expression one of defiant, unyielding justification. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair seemed to bristle with righteous energy, her eyes small and hard fixed on him with an unnerving intensity. Mrs. Adler Alistister began, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, a stark contrast to his usual measured academic tone. "Are you admitting that you assaulted my mother and willfully destroyed her essential medical devices?" "Assaulted." Mrs. Adler scoffed a brittle, contemptuous sound. "Don't be melodramatic, doctor. I merely removed the source of the disturbance. Your mother, I'm afraid, was entirely uncooperative. She seemed oblivious to the sonic torment she was inflicting. Some of us, you see, possess a more refined auditory apparatus. We are sensitive to the cacophony of modern electronics in a way that duller ears simply cannot comprehend." She gestured towards the ruined aids with a flick of her wrist. "Now perhaps we can all enjoy a bit of peace and quiet." Alistister looked from Adler's smug, unrepentant face to his mother's traumatized, silent form, then back to the mangled pieces of technology that had represented Eleanor's bridge to the world. A cold, precise anger, the kind that fueled his most complex forensic investigations, settled over him. This woman, in her profound ignorance and breathtaking arrogance, had not just broken 2 expensive pieces of equipment, She had violently ripped away his mother's ability to engage with life, to hear, to connect. And she had done so under the ludicrous pretext of phantom frequencies. Eleanor Finch, a man who had dedicated his life to the science of sound, would ensure that Millisent Adler understood the true meaning of evidence and the full weight of consequence. Dr. Eleanor Finch was a name whispered with respect in law enforcement circles and academic institutions alike. His audio forensics unit was a unique, highly specialized division within the city's police department, a place where the intangible world of sound was meticulously dissected and transformed into concrete, irrefutable evidence. His lab, a hushed, climate-controlled environment, housed an array of sophisticated equipment, anechoic chambers that could swallow every echo spectrographic analyzers that painted visual portraits of sound waves, directional microphones that could pluck a single voice from a roaring crowd, and powerful algorithms capable of filtering, enhancing, and authenticating the faintest, most degraded audio recordings. Alistister and his small dedicated team were the detectives of the auditory realm, their work often proving pivotal in solving complex crimes, from identifying masked assailants by the unique cadence of their speech to reconstructing the sequence of events at a crime scene based on the subtle acoustic signatures left behind. He was a man of quiet intensity, his passion for his work matched only by his devotion to his mother. Eleanor Finch was the gentle heart of his life. A retired music librarian, she had spent her career cataloging symphonies and sonatas, her days filled with the rich tapestry of human musical expression. Her own life had been a melody of quiet joys, the companionship of her late husband, a shared love of gardening, the pleasure of reading, and the delight of spirited conversations with Alistister. When progressive sensory neural hearing loss had begun to steal these sounds from her a decade ago, it had been a cruel, insidious theft. The world had gradually muted conversations, becoming a frustrating effort of lip-reading and guesswork. Music losing its vibrant color and texture, the comforting background hum of life, fading into a muffled, isolating fog. She had become withdrawn, her natural vivacity dimming the silence, breeding a loneliness that Alistister found heartbreaking. Then 2 years ago, after much research and consultation with a leading audiologist, Dr. Ramirez Alistister had invested in a pair of state-of-the-art, digitally programmable hearing aids for Eleanor. These were not mere amplifiers, they were sophisticated microcomputers, custom-tuned to Eleanor's specific hearing profile, capable of selectively amplifying speech frequencies while dampening background noise and even connecting via Bluetooth to her phone and television. The transformation had been astonishing. Color had returned to Eleanor's world literally and figuratively. She could hear the crisp consonants in Alistister's speech again, the delicate trill of a wren in her garden, the rich harmonies of her beloved Bach cantatas. She rejoined her book club, initiated lively phone calls with old friends, and her laughter, once a rare and precious sound, became frequent and full-bodied. The hearing aids were her constant companions, her indispensable link to a life fully lived. Their cost, nearly that of a small car, had been significant, but to Alistister, their value to his mother's well-being was immeasurable. Oakhaven Hills, the sprawling, meticulously planned community where Eleanor's cottage was nestled, prided itself on its mature trees, its pristine landscapes, and its almost reverential commitment to quietude. It was a neighborhood where HOA regulations governed everything from the precise shade of beige permitted for exterior paint to the maximum allowable decibels for lawn maintenance equipment. And at the helm of this rigorously ordered domain was Mrs. Millisent Adler, a woman whose personal crusade against noise pollution had become legendary and frequently insufferable. Mrs. Adler, a widow of considerable means and even more considerable opinions, had been elected HOA president 5 years prior on a platform of restoring tranquility and upholding community standards. Her interpretation of these standards, however, seemed to be entirely subjective and largely focused on eliminating any sound that personally displeased her. Her list of grievances was long and varied: the vulgar cacophony of wind chimes, the disruptive shrieking of children playing in the community park several blocks away, the incessant drone of a neighbor's air conditioning unit, the aggressive woofing of a perfectly placid golden retriever. She pursued these perceived infractions with a relentless, almost fanatical zeal, issuing violation notices, threatening fines, and generally making life miserable for anyone unfortunate enough to attract her auditory ire. Eleanor Finch, with her quiet life and her newfound auditory aids, had inevitably fallen onto Mrs. Adler's radar. The initial complaints were relatively minor, though no less irritating for their baselessness. A note about Eleanor's television being clearly audible from the public thoroughfare when Alistister knew for a fact his mother kept the volume at a level barely perceptible even within her own living room. A verbal warning about the startling clangor of Eleanor's antique grandfather clock chiming the hour a sound that had graced the neighborhood for decades without complaint. The first direct attack on Eleanor's hearing aids. The incident that signaled a disturbing escalation in Mrs. Adler's campaign had occurred during an HOA-sponsored garden tour. Eleanor, proud of her vibrant rose bushes, had been explaining their unique lineage to a small group of genuinely interested neighbors. She had her hearing aids set to a program that helped her focus on nearby voices in a group setting. Mrs. Adler, who had been lurking nearby, ostensibly admiring a patch of prize-winning irises, suddenly swooped in. Eleanor. Dear Mrs. Adler had trilled her voice laden with false sweetness. Forgive me for interrupting, but there seems to be a rather distressing high-frequency emission emanating from your earpieces. It's quite faint, I grant you, but to those of us with exceptionally sensitive auditory canals, it's like a dentist's drill. Several other residents have discreetly mentioned it to me as well. Perhaps you could have them recalibrated. Eleanor, mortified and flustered, had stammered an apology, her hand instinctively going to her ear. The other neighbors exchanged uncomfortable, perplexed glances. None of them had heard anything remotely resembling a dentist's drill. Alistister, when Eleanor recounted the incident to him later, his voice tight with controlled anger, had immediately recognized the pattern. Mrs. Adler was not just complaining about noise. She was actively trying to gaslight his mother to make her doubt the proper functioning of her vital medical devices and to isolate her from her neighbors. He had at that point taken the hearing aids to his own lab, subjecting them to a battery of rigorous acoustic tests. As he'd expected, they performed flawlessly, their output perfectly calibrated, with no anomalous emissions, no high-frequency screeches, no ultrasonic vibrations. They were marvels of miniature engineering designed to do one thing: help his mother hear. He had drafted a polite but firm letter to Mrs. Adler enclosing the certified technical specifications and his lab's clean bill of health for the devices, hoping that a factual scientific explanation would put an end to her baseless accusations. It had not. If anything, it seemed to inflame her. Mrs. Adler, it was clear, was not interested in facts. She was interested in control and in validating her own peculiar and increasingly aggressive perceptions of sound. The harassment intensified. Anonymous notes typed in a distinctive old-fashioned font that Alistister suspected originated from Adler's vintage typewriter began appearing on Eleanor's doorstep. They contained increasingly bizarre and threatening accusations. The electromagnetic field from your hearing enhancers is causing my migraines. Your artificial eardrums are interfering with local migratory bird patterns. Remove the sonic irritants or face community action. Mrs. Adler also began what Alistister could only describe as a campaign of targeted auditory assault. If Eleanor was sitting on her porch, Adler would suddenly decide to use her power leaf blower on the strip of lawn directly adjacent to Eleanor's property, or she would engage in loud, shrill conversations on her own porch, then later claim that any resulting discomfort Eleanor felt was due to feedback from her own malfunctioning aids. The breaking point for Mrs. Adler, the event that likely precipitated her final violent act, was Eleanor's quiet, polite refusal to comply with an outrageous HOA demand regarding the annual Oakhaven Hills Silent Night Christmas Carol stroll. Mrs. Adler, in her infinite wisdom, had decreed that to maintain the pristine auditory purity of the event, all participants were strongly encouraged to refrain from using any personal electronic amplification devices, a clear and discriminatory targeting of Eleanor's hearing aids. Eleanor, who loved Christmas carols and looked forward to this one social event of the holiday season, had, with Alistister's support, politely but firmly stated that she would be attending and she would be wearing her hearing aids, as was her right. This quiet act of defiance, this refusal to be silenced and excluded, had apparently been more than Mrs. Adler's fragile ego and obsessive need for control could bear. The discovery of Mrs. Adler's clandestine holistic sound therapy business, a revelation that came via an anonymous tip from a disgruntled former HOA employee shortly after the Christmas Carol incident, provided the crucial missing piece of the puzzle. Mrs. Adler, it turned out, was charging exorbitant fees to a select clientele for private sessions involving vibrational healing crystal bowl resonance therapy and deep silence immersion. These sessions, conducted in her own home, required an environment of absolute, almost anemic quiet. Any external sound, however faint or fleeting, was not just an annoyance to Mrs. Adler, it was a direct threat to her lucrative, unlicensed, and entirely unregulated income stream. Eleanor Finch, with her hearing aids representing a perceived source of uncontrollable, unpredictable sound, had become in Adler's warped and self-serving worldview, an obstacle to be eliminated. The hearing aids were not just an irritation, they were a threat to her livelihood. Back in the devastating silence of Eleanor's living room, Alistister Finch, chief of audio forensics, looked at the hammer at the shattered remnants of his mother's connection to the world, and at the unrepentant architect of this cruelty, Mrs. Millisent Adler. His professional training and his personal fury coalesced into a singular, ice-cold clarity. He would not just bring this woman to justice. He would do so using the very medium she had attempted to weaponize sound itself, or more precisely, the irrefutable, scientifically verifiable absence of the sounds she claimed had driven her to this act of violence. Mrs. Adler Alistister stated, his voice now stripped of all emotion, resonating with the chilling precision of a forensic report. Your allegations regarding sonic emissions from my mother's hearing aids are demonstrably false. These devices are Class II medical prosthetics regulated by the FDA. They are designed to receive and process ambient sound for the wearer, not to broadcast external frequencies. Their operational parameters are well within all accepted audiological and electromagnetic compatibility standards. I have personally conducted exhaustive spectral analysis on these specific aids, and I can state with absolute certainty that they produce no perceptible external emissions beyond the acoustic output directed into the ear canal itself, which is by design localized and minimal. Mrs. Adler's composure for the first time seemed to flicker. A tiny muscle twitched beside her eye. FDA, spectral analysis. You're trying to confuse me with your technical jargon, Dr. Finch. I trust my own senses, and my senses told me those things were a menace. Your senses? Mrs. Adler appeared to be either tragically miscalibrated or willfully deceitful, Alistister countered. He took a deliberate step closer, his gaze unwavering. You have not just destroyed expensive property, Mrs. Adler. You have committed a felony by willfully destroying essential medical assistive devices. You have assaulted an elderly individual. You have, with premeditation and malice, inflicted profound emotional distress and sensory deprivation upon my mother. I am now formally notifying you that you are being detained pending the arrival of the police, whom I am summoning immediately. He brought out his personal cell phone, his movements economical and precise. Mrs. Adler watched her face, paling slightly, as he clearly and calmly reported an assault battery and destruction of medical property, giving his name, his professional title, and the address. The mention of his official capacity seemed to register with her a dawning awareness that this was not merely a neighborhood squabble she could dominate with bluster and intimidation. This is an outrage. She finally sputtered her voice, losing some of its earlier conviction. A misunderstanding. Your mother is. She's overly sensitive. She probably broke them herself in a fit of pique and is trying to blame me. Alistister simply looked at her, a look that conveyed both profound contempt and the absolute certainty of a scientist who holds all the crucial data. Fortunately, Mrs. Adler, he said, his voice still chillingly calm. I have reason to believe that this entire incident, including your unprovoked entry, your verbal assault on my mother, and the act of destruction itself, may have been captured by an audio-video recording system installed in this house. A system whose recordings, I assure you, will be subjected to the most rigorous forensic analysis in my laboratory. An analysis that will not only reveal the sequence of events, but will also definitively prove the absence of any anomalous or annoying frequencies emanating from my mother's hearing aids prior to your intervention. The color drained completely from Mrs. Adler's face. The mention of a recording of forensic analysis seemed to pierce through her layers of arrogance and denial, touching a nerve of genuine fear. She opened her mouth to protest further, but no sound came out. The uniformed police officers, a Sergeant Miller and a younger patrolman, arrived with commendable speed. Alistister met them at the door quickly and concisely, outlining the situation, identifying himself and his role, and directing them to Mrs. Adler, who now stood rigidly by the fireplace, her earlier defiance visibly crumbling. He also indicated the potential audio-visual evidence from his mother's conservatory security system, a discrete unit he had helped her install some months prior, ostensibly for general security, but also with the unstated hope that it might capture any further instances of Adler's harassment. Eleanor, a keen amateur ornithologist, had taken to leaving the audio recording feature on hoping to capture the songs of the rarer birds that visited her garden. That innocent hobby, Alistister prayed, had just become their most powerful forensic tool. While Sergeant Miller took Mrs. Adler's preliminary and increasingly incoherent statement, Alistister, with the other officer as a witness, carefully retrieved the SD card from the conservatory recording unit. He placed it in a sterile evidence bag, his movements precise, his mind already outlining the protocols he would follow in his lab to extract and analyze its contents. His mother, now being comforted by a kind neighbor who had been alerted by the arrival of the police cars, watched him with a dawning flicker of hope in her otherwise devastated eyes. The hours that followed were a blur of meticulous focused activity for Alistister. Back in the anechoic quiet of his audio forensics unit lab with his most trusted senior technician, Maria Sanchez, assisting, he began the painstaking process of analyzing the recovered recording. The video quality from the small conservatory camera was surprisingly clear, capturing Mrs. Adler's agitated entrance, her aggressive gestures, Eleanor's visible fear and confusion. But it was the audio track that held the key. Using specialized software, Alistister isolated the ambient soundscape of the conservatory in the minutes leading up to Adler's intrusion. He ran spectrographic analysis, searched for any ultrasonic or high-frequency emissions, any feedback hum, any electronic screech. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, beyond the normal ambient sounds of a quiet room, the faint strains of a nature documentary his mother had been watching, and the delicate, almost inaudible click of her knitting needles. Then came Adler's voice, loud, accusatory, filled with her bizarre claims of sonic torture. Then Eleanor's soft, bewildered responses, and then, chillingly, the sickening sharp, repeated cracks as the hammer met the delicate plastic and microcircuitry of the hearing aids, followed by Adler's cruel, dismissive pronouncements. Alistister created a detailed forensic timeline, synchronizing the audio with the video, isolating and enhancing key vocal phrases, and crucially embedding visual readouts from the spectral analysis, demonstrating the complete absence of any anomalous sounds emanating from the hearing aids themselves right up until the moment of their violent destruction. The evidence was not just compelling, it was irrefutable. Millisent Adler's entire defense, her claim of being driven to distraction by unbearable device-generated noise, was a demonstrable, provable lie. The following morning, Alistister presented his comprehensive forensic report, complete with the annotated audio-video evidence, to Detective Marcus Harding, the experienced investigator assigned to the case. Harding, a man not easily impressed, watched and listened to the presentation with a deepening frown. When Alistister finally paused the playback after the last sickening crunch of the hammer, Harding let out a slow breath. "Dr. Finch," he said, shaking his head, "in 20 years on the force, I've seen a lot of cruelty, a lot of bizarre justifications for bad behavior. But this is in a league of its own. Her claim is not just baseless. It's a deliberate fabrication to cover a malicious assault. With this audio-visual evidence and your expert analysis, the district attorney will have everything needed. This isn't just property damage. This is felony destruction of a medical device. It's elder abuse, and given the violence and premeditation, we might even be looking at aggravated assault charges." The arrest of Mrs. Millisent Adler, carried out discreetly but firmly later that day at her Oak Haven Hills home, sent tremors of shock and, in many quarters, ill-concealed relief throughout the community. Her carefully constructed facade of dignified authority shattered as she was read her rights and escorted to a waiting patrol car. Her protests of innocence and renewed accusations against Eleanor, now sounding hollow and desperate even to her own ears. The subsequent legal proceedings were a masterclass in the power of irrefutable forensic evidence. Mrs. Adler's expensive legal team attempted various defenses, diminished capacity, due to a rare and unproven hyperauditory sensitivity syndrome, a momentary lapse of judgment under extreme sonic provocation, even a desperate attempt to claim that Eleanor had somehow tampered with the recording. But Alistister's meticulous, scientifically unimpeachable presentation of the audio-visual evidence, combined with expert testimony from Dr. Ramirez, Eleanor's audiologist, who detailed the vital medical necessity and exorbitant replacement cost upwards of $20,000 for the custom-programmed pair of the destroyed hearing aids, left the jury with no room for doubt. The exposure of Adler's clandestine, unlicensed sound therapy business during the trial further eroded her credibility, painting her not as a victim of noise, but as a perpetrator of fraud, willing to go to extreme lengths to protect her illicit income. Several former clients, emboldened by her public downfall, came forward with their own stories of her bizarre behavior and exorbitant fees for questionable treatments. Millisent Adler was found guilty on all major charges. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman with little patience for bullies or frauds, delivered a scathing indictment of Adler's character and actions during sentencing. She spoke of Adler's profound lack of empathy, her calculated cruelty towards a vulnerable senior citizen, and her arrogant and contemptible attempt to use fabricated claims of sensory distress to justify a violent and malicious act. Adler was sentenced to a significant period of incarceration, ordered to pay full restitution to Eleanor Finch for the destroyed hearing aids and for therapy to address the emotional trauma, and was hit with substantial fines. Her reign as HOA president was over her reputation in ruins, her carefully curated world of silence and control shattered by the undeniable truth of recorded sound. For Eleanor Finch, the journey back to a life filled with sound was arduous. The weeks she spent in a muffled, disorienting silence while awaiting the painstaking creation of new custom-fitted hearing aids were a stark reminder of the precious gift that had been so violently torn from her. She became withdrawn, fearful the vibrant spark in her eyes dimmed by trauma. But Alistister was her constant, patient support. He filled her home with written notes, communicated with gestures and exaggerated lip movements, and simply sat with her, his presence a comforting anchor in her soundless world. The Oakhaven Hills community, too, rallied around Eleanor in a way that surprised and deeply touched her. Neighbors who had once been intimidated by Adler or indifferent to Eleanor's plight now expressed their shame and regret, offering apologies, bringing meals, and simply sitting with her in quiet companionship. The HOA board, in emergency session, summarily removed Adler from her presidency and issued a formal public apology to Eleanor, pledging to overhaul its bylaws and foster a more inclusive, compassionate community ethos. When Eleanor's new hearing aids finally arrived, even more advanced and subtly powerful than her last pair, the moment she switched them on was one of profound, tearful relief. The world rushed back in a symphony of familiar, cherished sounds. The ticking of her grandfather clock, the chirping of sparrows outside her window, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, and most wonderfully, the clear, loving voice of her son Alistister as he leaned close and whispered, "Welcome back, Mother. We've missed you." Life in Oakhaven Hills slowly returned to a new, more considered kind of normal. The silence that Millisent Adler had so obsessively craved was replaced by the natural, gentle sounds of a community learning to listen to each other with more care, more empathy. Alistister Finch continued his vital work, his dedication to the science of sound deepened by the personal battle he had fought and won. He knew that the intricate dance of sound waves, the subtle frequencies and harmonics he analyzed daily, held not just clues to crimes, but the very essence of human connection, communication, and joy. And the most beautiful sound of all, he often reflected, was the sound of his mother's laughter, clear and unrestrained. A melody restored a testament to resilience and a final, definitive answer to the discordant noise of cruelty.